As you will note, we try to bring as main speakers today esteemed public figures, personalities from each field. With our next guest, we cover everything from physics to sociology, and I would argue philosophy. Professor Adrian Bejan is the recipient of the Benjamin Franklin Medal of Honor. He is a member of several academies, including the Romanian and Moldovan Academy, I believe, also the Mexican Academy. And he is Duke University J.A. Jones Distinguished Faculty. He's one of our most cited Romanian-born scientists. I think it was because of one of his concepts that I will mention later. And he's the author of science books that render scientific concepts accessible for a wider readership. His acclaimed books, Design in Nature and The Physics of Life, are well known. He recently published another book that may not yet be on your radar, Freedom and Evolution, Hierarchy in Nature, Society, and Science. I haven't asked him to explain how we might apply constructional theory to our diaspora solidarity structures, nor to comment on the fluidity mechanics of our diaspora hubs, but I will ask him to speak to us today about this messy concept of freedom that helps us experiment and eventually evolve. It sounds to me that it is the essence of the American experiment and potentially part of his personal journey. Professor Bejan?
Okay, thank you, Theo, for the introduction, also for the invitation to speak, and especially for this great effort of keeping all of us together now and in the future. I'll try to be brief because obviously time is short. Theo originally asked me to speak 2 minutes about my most recent theory, which is the physics of why the days seem shorter as we get older. He probably knows you, the group, much better. He knows that all of you are young and you're not concerned with this kind of a theory, especially during the pandemic. So 2 days ago, he wrote to me again and asked me to speak for 10 minutes, not 2 minutes. Fortunately, a visitor of mine here, who is a self-declared filmmaker, made a 1 hour long video of this introduction to the new book, Freedom and Evolution. I know we don't have 1 hour for that. So I extracted from that video only 9 minutes, consisting of the first slide and the concluding 5 slides. So please try to follow. And here we go. All right. Welcome. This lecture is a brief introduction to my new book, Freedom and Evolution, with the subtitle, Hierarchy in Nature, Society, and Science. It is a broad area, too long for this short lecture. Therefore, I reduced it to the essentials, which are covered in the book, namely 4 topics. One is thermodynamics, then freedom and evolution together, diversity and hierarchy together, and science evolving itself in the direction of more and more freedom. So we start with thermodynamics, the science queen. Its laws are obeyed by everything in nature. And the basic story, in fact, the origin of the subject is the idea that power is available from heating, or power from fire. I made an icon of that. The so-called thermodynamic system is one of very many in this blue domain. And heating from fuel or from food, if you think of animals, is converted partially into power. The remainder is necessarily dumped as heating into the environment. Now, the drawing suggests the flow of the lecture. In the blue, you have not one, but many, many contrivances. Some very old, some are much newer. So evolution is already part of the graphics of this presentation. The biggest example of this type of a hierarchy emerging naturally on Earth is the movement of humanity on the globe. This is the air travel 20 years ago, illustrated by NASA in terms of the measured condensation trails behind all flying aircraft. You see where the flying is going on. That is where the red is the heart with the two chambers of air travel. The whole globe is traveling, so the movement is hierarchical, and that means that the fuel consumption is hierarchical as well. This hierarchy was not dictated by the General Secretary of the Communist Party. This happened naturally. And with that idea, we can now admire the another version of the facts. Plotted here are facts about economics, hand in hand with the technology of driving movement on the planet. Fuel is being burned, of course. From fire comes power, from power comes movement, and you see here that annual fuel use is essentially proportional to annual wealth, known as gross domestic product. And so the conclusion then is that there is a rough one-to-one proportionality between annual fuel use and annual wealth. We've already established that fuel use emerges hierarchically naturally. That means that the hierarchical distribution of wealth on the globe is hierarchical, is natural as well. So the natural phenomenon that gave birth to hierarchy in air travel is the same physics that makes wealth hierarchy unstoppable, if you will, on the globe. The subtle point about this graph is the time arrow of all the dots that occupy this yellow band. All the dots are racing upward. Listen to government reports every year. Doesn't matter which country you're concerned with. Governments are interested in greater wealth or increased GDP for their population. And that means, of course, necessarily an increase from year to year in fuel consumption. So there's a time arrow, which is as old as the Homo sapiens. In this case, this panel is about the evolution from the adoption of fire to power generation today. I made it in 2 dimensions to show how the acquisition of fuel for heating proceeded through social organization, from hunting and gathering to all the way to the present era. On the abscissa, the same story, but in the language of social organization, from band to tribe all the way to state and global constructs today. The time arrow is toward the increase in population, advancement, wealth, freedom, and of course, in the same direction, science itself is evolving. The population is increasing. The individuals, of course, become more and more numerous. They become less and less visible. And unfortunately, the single individual in this direction becomes less and less important. And that brings me to the concluding idea, which is that the science as a construct of the human mind, an empowering construct, is itself a evolutionary design, evolving in this direction of time that I just illustrated. I have a way to illustrate that with the evolution of thermodynamics itself over the past 200 years, from its origins, originally caloric theory and mechanics, and then 150 years ago, thermodynamics, almost 60 years ago, the corralling of the long lost child of caloric theory called heat transfer back into thermodynamics, and then today, starting with 20 years ago, bringing in the evolutionary designs, the designs that in fact are responsible for the thickness of every single thermodynamics book. Every thermodynamics book is about contrivances that have been getting better over time, techniques for producing power from fire or producing heating and cooling from the same fire. Those drawings are in the books. Well, they've been evolving. They've been evolving over time. And now with these three roots into the very fertile ground of human ingenuity, we have a thermodynamics that's, I think, much better position to advance forward. Now, there's a subtle story that goes with the movie that this drawing is like the poster for a movie. And it is that the march from left to right is punctuated by individuals who had ideas. You see their names in the better books that have been written. You see the places where they produced. Renaissance in Italy, or obviously steam engine makers in Britain, and you know the examples. These are very special places. These were places where the individuals were not only free enough to move and to talk and to speak, also wealthy enough to move, to talk and to speak and to write and to publish. But these are, in particular, these are places where individuals were encouraged to come up with ideas. And so from left to right, the evolution of science is speaking of the importance of freedom in the march toward performance of any evolutionary design. My concluding slide is of the opposite kind, which is this doesn't require any explanation, except that the punchline is that march in columns, do not climb peaks.
Okay. I don't know how to.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. I don't know how to get rid of this screen, but okay. Thank you. Perfect. I had not done this before. This was the first time that I gave such a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and it was excellent. And I know I start asking with one finger, and then I ask for the entire hand. I wanted all the books together in a few minutes of presentation. Thank you so much. We really appreciate having you from the beginning.